Shalom to all. This special shiur will be given in memory of our friend Mendel Gorman from England, who was nifta on Purim. Mendel was associated with helping Jews in England to acquire kosher and mahudar diket tefillin and mezuzos, and in any area of Stam. He was a member in our forum, and this year is dedicated le'ilui Nishmaso. This year also will be in merit for many people who are participating in the forum in different ways, and those especially that need refuah sheleimah, that Hashem should grant them refuah sheleimah b'karov, especially my friend Pinchas Shalom ben Bracha should have a refuah sheleimah immediately. I want to also thank Eli Gutnick for his innovation in general of making this forum, this connection, this technical possibility for Sofrim all over the world to be connected, to speak to each other, to share opinions, ideas, questions, debates, and any issues in regard to Stam. And this new innovation of making a shiur live, I want to thank him in the name of many friends of the forum. Okay, I think I'm more or less on time. I'm going to start the shiur. The issue of the shiur is how to relate to a problem that in a Sefer Torah or Tefillin or Mezuzah, in the middle of a line, there's an empty space that is not called for. This is called in the poskim a revach parsha b'makom she'eino parsha, or b'makom she'eino tzricha. That means an empty space in the middle of a parsha, in a place that really is not called to be a parsha. How do we relate to the issue? What are the halachic problems, and what are the possibilities of fixing this problem? So we have to first explain the general theme of what is a revach parsha. What does it mean? The Gemara and the poskim teach us that a Sefer Torah is divided up into passages, parshiyot. That means passages. And there's a division between each parsha by a break in the script and a part of the line left open, unwritten. When some of the breaks are in a special form, which is called parsha ptucha, an open parsha, which in general, I'm not getting into the details, but in general means that there's an empty space at the end of the line, and the next parsha starts at the beginning of the line immediately afterwards. This is considered a parsha ptucha, an open parsha. Another type of parsha in the Torah is a parsha stuma, a closed passage. That means that the first passage finishes at the beginning of a line, there's an empty space in the middle of the line, and the next parsha starts at the end or towards the end of that same line. So the empty space is in the middle of the line. These two types of parshot vary in the Sefer Torah. Some places, the tradition is that the parsha has to be ptucha, and some places in the Torah, the parsha will be stuma. The Gemara teaches clearly, and this is accepted by all the poskim, that in a place that the Torah is called to make a parsha, either ptucha or stuma, and a person did not leave a parsha at all, just continued the script and wrote, and combined two passages together as if they're one passage. That means he skipped the whole empty space demanded for a parsha, either ptucha or stuma. That is invalid until it can be fixed, if it can be fixed. The same law applies if a person reversed, and instead of leaving a form of a parsha ptucha, instead he left the form of a parsha stuma. Or in a place that is called to be a parsha stuma, instead he made it a parsha ptucha. Also in these two cases, the halacha is clear and known to all that the Sefer Torah is invalid, again, unless this can be fixed, and if it will be fixed. Our issue today is talking about a fourth possibility, another problem, that a empty space of a parsha, which is indeed not a parsha, is left for some reason. I'll give an example. Between Shema and Uvish Orecha in Tefillin, and also in Sefer Torah, the script is continuous from the word Shema till Uvish Orecha, and there's no empty spaces in the middle. If one would leave in the middle of Shema, let's say before the word Vahavta, he would leave an empty space in the middle of the line. He would have on one side, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, empty space, and then Vahavta. So he has a Revach Parsha, a space fit for Parsha, in a place in the Torah that really does not call for Parsha. What is the law in this case? This is what we're talking about today. What are the problems? What are the opinions? And how to relate to this issue. The more practical case that this would occur would be, and it's mentioned in the poskim, that a person by mistake wrote a word twice. For example, if I said that he had left a place before Vahavta, he wrote the word Vahavta twice. He wrote Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. A Sefer Torah or Tefillin or Mezuzah that have extra letters or extra words is invalid, but they can be erased, and now the Sefer Torah or Tefillin will be kosher because the words and letters are exact. The extra word has been eliminated, but a new problem came up. Now we have an empty space equal to what was written before Ve'ahavta in the middle of a line. The Rambam writes clearly in Hilchot Sefer Torah that if a person will leave a parsha, a Revach parsha, in a place that is not indeed a parsha, this will equally make the Sefer Torah apostle. So the Rambam says clearly that just like if a person skipped and did not write a parsha, that means he didn't leave the space according to the halacha, or he changed the form of the spaces, or he put a space, one of these two forms, either a psucha or a stuma, in a place that really there's no parsha. This is a change in the way of writing the Sefer Torah, and the Sefer Torah is not kosher. Obviously, we're not talking if a person will fix it, then the halacha and the Shulchan Aruch is that once the parshios have been fixed and have been rewritten in the correct way, they are again valid. They will become kosher Sefer Torah. In a Sefer Torah in general, it's quite easy usually to fix such problems because we can erase another word or two, and rearrange the line and rearrange the setting of the line so there won't be an empty space that causes a problem. Everybody understands that in a tefillin and a mezuzah, this possibility is impossible, because by erasing even one letter and later rewriting it automatically turns the tefillin and the mezuzah unkosher, because they are written now shelo kesidran. So we have no possibility in a tefillin or mezuzah scenario to rearrange the line by erasing and moving words or letters. There isn't an easy way to fix this. If the word before, for example, what I said, the ahavta, now the letter immediately before the first v'ahavta, if I would erase the first v'ahavta, is the big daled of echad. The big daled is easy to just extend the head of the daled, the gag, extend it to cover the gap. So we can extend the gag of the daled over the area that was before written on the first v'ahavta, and now the words v'ahavta and echad will be close to each other, and we have eliminated the gap in the tefillin or the mezuzah. This will be also possible any other letter that can be lengthened, which aren't that many, basically daled and reish, and maybe a few other letters. But most of the letters cannot be really extended, so this possibility is not always available for us to fix the tefillin and mezuzah, because the letters that are, the letter that is before the empty space cannot be extended. And I can't erase the words and rearrange them because it's shelo kesidran. The laws of the psucha and stuma in tefillin and mezuzah basically are the same as Sefer Torah. I'm not getting into this in the shiur now to explain the differences between a parsha ptucha and a stuma and their relation to the Sefer Torah or tefillin mezuzah, but I'm speaking explicitly about the problem of leaving an empty space which would make as if it's a parsha when there is actually no parsha. This is accepted to be considered a pasul, both in a Sefer Torah and a tefillin and a mezuzah, and this is the opinion of the Rambam. But there is another opinion. The Bach explains in the opinion of the Tur, and obviously he understood that this is the opinion of the Tosfot, Rabbeinu Tam, and the Rosh. The Bach explains that although they agree to the Rambam that changing the forms of the parshas or not making the parshas where they're called for is pasul, but if a person made an empty space in the middle of nowhere, that means just in the middle of a line, he left an empty space, this is not pasul, because actually there is no parsha here. Although there's an empty space, this has no meaning. This is a unique opinion of the Bach. Some achronim quote other rabbis that also seemingly hold so. This is a minority opinion. But the Bach explains that according to the Rosh and the Tur, the making of a parsha is not only the form of the parsha, but also that it is indeed in truth a parsha. If an empty space is left in the middle of a true parsha, this will not make the Sefer Torah or the tefillin not kosher, because that empty space doesn't mean anything. All the achronim after the Bach do not accept the Bach's opinion as halacha, and all agree that we have to be machmir and follow the Rambam's opinion that an empty space in a place that is not supposed to be a parsha makes either the Sefer Torah or the tefillin or the mezuzah invalid unless it is fixed. Therefore, if we have definitely in a tefillin and a mezuzah an empty space that is equal to a shiur parsha, we are in trouble. Unless we can extend the letter before, as I gave an example before. If not, we have a big problem. As it is, it's not kosher. If it cannot be fixed, these tefillin and mezuzah are invalid and they're going to gniza. We'll speak later in this class about a way of fixing it by making holes in the cloth, that the holes eliminate the area from being worthy of being written on. I'll speak about that later. But meanwhile, I want to speak about the limits and the edges of this problem. How far do we get into this problem? So the basic issue is, how much is considered a shiur parsha? What is considered the space that makes a shiur parsha? In regard to the laws of psuchot and stumot, we know from the Shulchan Aruch, both in Yoredeya, in Hilchot Sefer Torah, and also in Hilchot Tefillin, that there's a basic argument between the Rambam and the Rosh in what exactly are the forms of a parsha psucha and a stuma. This is a known argument. There's another argument, though, that is important for our issue, between the Rambam and the Rosh in regard to the parshas. Not only the forms of exactly how a parsha psucha would appear or can appear in a Sefer Torah or Tefillin, and how a parsha stuma can appear in a Sefer Torah Tefillin, that argument is known, and we're not getting into that. But they have another argument, a second argument. According to the Rambam, the space that makes up of a parsha is equal both in a parsha psucha and a stuma. There's no indication at all in the Rambam that there's any difference in the space of the parsha between a psucha and a stuma. The whole difference is only where the empty space stands. Again, we'll use the more classic example. If the space stands at the end of the line and the space is 9 letters, then that will be called a parsha ptucha. If the space is in the middle of the line and the space is 9 letters, this will be called a parsha stuma. So the difference between ptucha and stuma, according to the Rambam, is only in one issue, where they appear in the line. But the size of the parsha, there's no difference. What is the shiur of a parsha according to the Rambam? The Rambam says that the custom between the sofrim, and this is the custom till this day, mitzvah lechatchila, that one should leave space to write 3 times the word asher. Asher, asher, asher. A space that one could fit in from the same size of script. Write there, asher, leave a small space between one word and the second word. Again, write the word asher, a small space, and the third word asher. This will accumulate to around 10 medium-sized letters, like aleph or base, maybe even a bit slightly more, maybe even 10 and a half letters, because we have to consider that shin is a bit wider than a regular letter, and also the spacing mentioned before. So this is a mitzvah lechatchila, to leave the spacing, both in a parsha ptucha or stuma, of this size. But the Rambam says that this is not ma'akev. If the sofer did not leave that space, it's also kosher. The Beit Yosef writes that although the Rambam doesn't clearly explain what is the minimum size of a parsha, it seems that if there are any way of calculating a space of 9 letters in that space, it will be kosher. Therefore, the Beit Yosef writes, and this is accepted by all authorities after the Shulchan Aruch, that if the space is minimal, that we can write inside 9 yudim, which the yud is the smallest letter in the alphabet, if we could squeeze, and in the same size of script, we could put in there and write 9 yudim, one after another, without an extra spacing between words, because these are only letters. There must be a minimum space between yud and yud, a hair's breadth, that the yudim are not touching. So this, in our script, is probably equivalent to the width of 8 kulmusim, because a person can easily write a yud, which is 3/4 of a kulmus, and when you put that together with some minimal spacing between the yuds, it'll come up to around 8 kulmusim in the width of the shita of the line, and that the Beit Yosef says is the minimum size that is accepted is 9 yudim. Less than that, the Beit Yosef, although it doesn't say clearly, but it seems obvious, and this is accepted psak of all the achronim. Less than 9 yudim cannot be accepted as a parsha, not for psucha, not for stuma. So we know that the Rambam, and probably the Beit Yosef's opinion himself, that 9 letters must be the space of a parsha, and there's a mitzvah lechatchila of gimel pamim asher, and there's a minimal size of 9 yudim, and less than that is not considered a parsha at all. But there's no difference in these sizes between a parsha, psucha, and stuma. But the Rosh and the Tur and Rabbeinu Tam hold that not only that the stuma differs from the psucha in where the space is put on the line, but also the size. A parsha psucha, according to the Rosh and the Tur, is 9 letters. But a parsha stuma is sufficient in a minimal size of 3 letters. If the size of 3 letters is left empty in the middle of a line, we have a parsha stuma according to the Rosh. According to the Rambam, this will not be accepted as a parsha stuma because the space is not big enough. So we have another argument between the Rambam and the Rosh in regarding to the size of a parsha stuma. According to the Rambam, the stuma has to be 9 letters. According to Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh and the Tur, 3 letters. Obviously, the problem is if the empty space left after I erased the word that was written by mistake in a tefillin, and I erased this extra word, and I'm left with a space that is between 3 and 9 letters. If the space is less than 3 letters, there's no problem, because the refuah is not equal to a parsha stuma. If there is 9 letters empty space, it's possible unless I can fix it according to everybody. But if it's in the medium size, in the areas between 3 and 9 letters, then I'm into a machloket between the Rambam and the Rosh. The Rambam will say that the parsha is kosher because there's no minimal size of a parsha stuma here. So less than 9 letters is not considered anything. But according to the Rosh, if there are 3 letters, then there is a parsha stuma. So according to the Rosh, there would be a problem. So here we come to the question: how much are we choshesh or care or want to be yotzeh that our tefillin and mezuzah will be kosher even according to the Rosh, or maybe even according to the Rosh and the Tur, there's ways of getting around this problem. So the first question that I'm bringing up is: are we really chosheshim ledat Rabbeinu Tam? Do we really care about a refuah, an empty space left in the middle of the line that seems to be similar to a parsha stuma, but it's not in place, and it doesn't have the area of 9 yudim? So according to the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam, there might be a problem. Are we choshesh to this shita at all or not? The Pri Megadim in Siman Lamed Beis in Hilchos Tefillin clearly says, yes, we are choshesh to Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, and a person should be careful whenever he fixes the spacing, or if leaving spacing between words, that he should be careful, lechatchila, that there should not be even a parsha stuma according to Rabbeinu Tam or according to the Rosh. The Mishnah Berurah and the Kesef HaSofer equally copy this opinion of the Pri Megadim, and they all write that when considering spacing between words in a tefillin and mezuzah, obviously they weren't speaking about Sefer Torah, but the same would be in a Sefer Torah, one should be careful lechatchila, not to allow a space that is equal to a Shiur Parsha of Rabbeinu Tam. But b'di'evet, the Pri Megadim and the Mishnah Brura and the Kesef Sofer say that if there's no way out, we can allow, and again, we'll call this b'di'evet because we're in a fixed situation which we cannot fix. So b'di'evet, we can rely on the Rambam and the Beis Yosef's opinion that less than 9 letters is not considered at all a parsha. So according to them, it's kosher. And we don't have to care for Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, b'di'evet. Rather, we can say that the tefillin are kosher b'di'evet. This opinion is also shared by the Chida in his book LeDavid Emet. He writes in LeDavid Emet that if there are 2 Sifrei Torahs available in the synagogue, and one of them has an empty space which is equal to a Parsha Stum of Rabbeinu Tam, this Sefer Torah should not be used because we can read in the other Sefer Torah. So here also we see that the Chida prefers the Sefer Torah that is fitting with spacing, even according to Rabbeinu Tam, and not to use the Sefer Torah, which is fitting only according to the Rambam and not fitting according to Rabbeinu Tam. So we have 4 poskim of the later poskim that all agree that lechatchila, one should be careful, if possible, not to allow a space in the middle of the line that would accumulate to a equal revach parsha stuma according to the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam. I would admit here that it seems from the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch of the Rav in Siman Lamed Beis that he doesn't care even lechatchila for anything less than 9 letters, which are 9 yudim. Seemingly, his opinion is that less than 9 yudim is not considered a parsha at all, and there's nothing to be, nothing to worry about. He doesn't say this clearly. This is my assumption of understanding what he writes. But let's go back to the Pri Megadim that says that one should be careful. The Pri Megadim not only is choshesh to the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, he poses another problem. It seems almost clear from the Pri Megadim that his understanding of 3 letters in Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh meant 3 yudim. This is not clearly written in Rabbeinu Tam, the Tosfot, or in the Rosh on the Tur. What is the 3 letters that constitute the Shiur Parsha? One may easily say that Rabbeinu Tam, the Rosh, meant 3 big letters, like 3 beitim. But it seems from the Pri Megadim that he is careful, and he is telling us to be careful not even to leave 3 minimal letters, which are 3 yudim. That means a empty space of 3 yudim, which means that erasing almost any word leaves you in a problem of leaving an empty space of Rabbeinu Tam in the middle of the line. In order to relate to this problem, I would rather say that it seems that the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam, when they meant 3 letters, they did not mean 3 yudim, not like it's understood of the Pri Megadim's opinion. The pshat, both in the Rosh and the Tur, and from other early Rishonim, is when they meant that the spacing of Parsha Stuma is to write a word of 2 or 3 letters in that empty space, they meant regular letters. They did not mean yudim. They meant to write a word of 2 or 3 letters, which normally are letters of the size of a bet. So I think it's fair to assume that Rabbeinu Tam's and the Rosh holding of the size of a Parsha Stuma is not 3 yudim, but 3 beitim, which gives us some area to be makel. 3 beitim are equal to around at least 6 yudim, at least. So that means if the area between words that was left after erasing a extra word is 6 yudim or 3 beitim, then we are in question. But less than that, 3 or 4 or 5 yudim will not be a problem even according to the Rosh. So we have limited the problem mentioned before, that we are talking about a space, although it's not 9 yudim, but it's close to 9 yudim. It's in the area of 6 to 9 yudim. This will constitute the question and not 6 yudim. I can't in detail explain why it seems more accurate to say that Rabbeinu Tam held that the 3 letters are 3 big letters, but I'm not the only person to hold so. Other rabbis have also mentioned that this is more logically holding in the Rosh and the Rabbeinu Tam. I'm not going to get into explaining the proofs, but I think it's fair to assume that this is the truth in Rabbeinu Tam's Shita, that a Parsha Stuma is 3 regular letters, 3 Beisim and not 3 Yudim. So less than 3 Beitim, I don't think that we have to be really over careful and definitely not call these tefillin or mezuzah, that we could not minimize the space left and we're left with 4 or 5 Yudim to call this b'di'evet kosher. But I want to go on and say that even when it's definitely in the Shiur of Rabbeinu Tam, that means we have an area of 7 or 8 Yudim, but impossible to put in 9 Yudim, which we're going to the argument between the Rosh and the Rambam, I still claim that it's fair to say that the tefillin are kosher lechatchila. Although I will accept what the Pri Megadim says, that one should be careful in the first place, but after the fact, in a given situation, that we had no way of fixing the tefillin or mezuzah only by erasing a word, and we're left with an empty space that is less than 9 yudim, I think it's fair to say that the tefillin are kosher and mehudar, and I want to give the reasons why. First of all, we can assume that this problem is no worse than a regular sfeika, because we can look at the tefillin and saying, well, according to the Rambam and the Beit Yosef, there's no problem at all, because there's no Shiur Parsha. And even according to the Tur and the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam, that this is equal to a Shiur Parsha, but the Bach says that a empty space left in a place that is not supposed to be a Parsha is not really called a Parsha. So even according to the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam, there's still an opinion of the Bach that says that in this case it's not a Parsha. So according to the Rambam, and maybe even according to the Rosh, we're not in a problem of leaving a Parsha b'makom she'eino tzricha. That's one point to consider. And as I said before, the Chatam Sofer, maybe I didn't mention it, it's written in my notes, I don't remember if I mentioned it, but anyway, the Chatam Sofer clearly says that although we don't paskin like the Bach, but you cannot disregard his opinion, and it must be taken into consideration. For example, like the case that I'm giving before you, that we can be mitzaref, the kula, that means the lenient opinion of the Bach, to another opinion, and put one and one together, which is generally called a sfeika. Now, although this is a problematic sfeika, because putting together 2 different opinions is not always called a sfeika in halacha, as we know from the laws of sfeika of the shach, but still, it's putting together 2 opinions that from each side, they both say it's okay. So we're left with a minor opinion that says that even after the fact, it's not okay. But I want to strengthen even more than what the Bach said. The Bach was talking about a person that deliberately left an empty space in the line, and the Bach says that although he was not supposed to leave this space, but there's no real parsha here. But in our case, a person did not deliberately leave an empty space. He did not want this empty space to be there. This empty space has been caused by mistake. There are opinions, and there is a very strong svara to say, and this is not my innovation. This is already mentioned in the Lishkat HaSofer in chapter 15. The Lishkat HaSofer brings from the Heichal HaBracha and the Yeshuas Yaakov that they both say something, although the Lishkat HaSofer doesn't accept it, but they both say that if a parsha or an empty space was left, but it's different from all the other parshias, there's something not equal to the other parshas, which indicates that here something else happened. It's obvious that this is not left for the sake of a parsha. That is not considered a parsha. One might consider the signs of the erasing. The erasing shows you that something's wrong here. This was not left empty for the sake of a parsha. There was a word here that was erased. But okay, let's say that that's not a strong enough proof. But the Lishkat HaSofer there says in the name of the Heichal Bracha that all the parshas in the Sefer Torah, or in our case the Tefillin or Mezuzah, were 9 big letters. And this empty space is different. It's only, he's talking about 9 Yudim. Now I'm talking about even lesser than 9 Yudim. This empty space is 7 or 8 Yudim, so this is not the normal parsha that this Sofer is leaving. Let's look in Tefillin. You look after Kaddish, you have a big empty space. You look after Voya Kivyacha, you have a big empty space. You look after Shema. Now, no matter what type of psuch or stuma you're going to put in after Shema, when you combine the Shema and the Vayam Shemor, or look at each one different, you see a very big space. Now, what do I have in this given scenario? You have in the middle of the line a little space. This little space is obviously is different than the regular spacing. Now, I will never chas v'shalom use this opinion to be machshir an empty space that's left in the middle of a line that has 9 yudim, because 9 yudim, all the poskim say constitutes a shiur parsha, and a shiur parsha b'mokom she'eino tzricha, we paskin like the Rambam, and it's possible. And if this is not fixed, the tefillin are not kosher. But when we're talking about a revach of Rabbeinu Tam, which is less than 9 yudim, and we have the Bach, and we have this extra svara, and also, according to the Rambam and Bid Yosef, there's no problem. I think it's fair to put all this together and say that if one wants to consider these tefillin or mezuzah kosher after the fact, but right now they are accepted and they're kosher, and although there is a revach of Rabbeinu Tam, I don't see this too far-fetched. I think that this is fair to say that these tefillin, that the word had been erased, and we could not minimize the empty space, and we calculated the empty space to be definitely less than 9 yudim. It's impossible to put in here 9 yudim. We are only in a problem according to the Rabbeinu Tam and Rosh and Tur, they consider a stuma of 3 letters. And although there might be place to put 3 letters in, still we have the Bach and this extra svara and some opinions that don't even consider caring of Rabbeinu Tam even lechatchila. So at least b'di'evid, in this given situation, I think these tefillin and mezuzahs are kosher and fit to be used after the fact. Now, okay, all right. Now I want to go to the second part of this class. It's a bit shorter, speaking about the known way of fixing an empty space in a Sefer Torah or Tefillin when we cannot extend the letters. And this is used even when the empty space is more than 9 letters, which is definitely possible, as I explained before. The Gan Melech is actually the author of the Ginat Vradim, rabbi in Egypt in the 18th century, one of the biggest poskim of his day. And he writes in the Gan Melech, which is part of his book, Ginat Vradim, he writes that in this case, a person can make holes in the cloth, indicating that this area is unfit to be written on. And since it's unfit to be written on, so already it's not considered a refuah parsha. Rabbi Kiva Eger quotes this in Hilchot Sefer Torah. The Kol Yaakov writes in Hilchot Tefillin, and possibly also in Hilchot Sefer Torah, that this is actually the custom in Baghdad. That means many communities had done and used this custom that when coming to a problem of erasing a word, leaving an empty space that would constitute a Shiur parsha in a place that is unneeded, they would make holes in the cloth to render the area now unfit. The basis of the Gan Melech is what we understand from the Beit Yosef, and the Keset HaSofer and the Lishkat HaSofer clearly mention this also, I think, in chapter 15, that a place that is unfit to be written on is not considered a refuah parsha, because it's obvious that was left open because it was impossible to write on. So if there's a tear in the cloth or a big hole, so we don't consider this a refuah parsha because you can't write anything. So the Gan Melech says that not only if there was a tear or hole in the beginning, we can make a hole afterwards and reverse this part of the cloth to an unfit part. Now, although most communities follow this custom, like the Kol Yaakov says, and in Eretz Yisrael and probably in many areas of the world, this custom is followed, I must put in here I want to regard to 2 points. First of all, not all the Achronim accept the Gan Melech. There are Achronim that claim that we must make a difference between an area that was never fit to be written and, in our case, an area that was fit to be written. So at some specific time, it could be written, and it was a refuah parsha, and you want to later reverse the law of this area to an unfit. They claim that this does not fix that pasul. Although this opinion is not accepted, as we said before, most communities do accept the leniency of Gan Melech, but still I want people to know that this is not so glat. Glat means chalak, simple. There are opposing views to this heter. But I want to speak about another, and to my opinion, a much more problematic issue in the making of the holes. What I saw is that when a sofer was stuck with an empty area, they would take a needle, a pin, and make tiny holes in the cloth, covering the area. And now, when you look at the cloth, you see that there are tiny holes in the cloth, and sometimes you don't really see the holes. You see like the, I don't know how you call it, in Hebrew it's mechuspas, it's the area of the cloth seems different. And when you look closer, then you see, oh yeah, there's holes of needles here. But these holes are not that big. What is the problem? The problem is that we're getting into a issue that's an argument in Hilchot Tefillin. How minimal is the size of a hole that cannot be written over it or next to it? The Taz writes that if the hole can only be seen against the sun, then any letter touching that hole is considered lo mukaf gvil. It's not surrounded by parchment, and lo mukaf gvil is possible. Although we cannot see the hole in our eyes, but if we pick up the cloth, put it against the sun, and we could see the hole, then this hole makes the word, the letter, invalid because it's not mukaf vil. The Magen Avram there, and most Achronim follow the Magen Avram's opinion. The Mishnah Berurah clearly writes this, the Shulchan Aruch Harav clearly writes, and many others that the Mishnah Berurah quotes. They all say, no, the size of a hole that will render the word unkosher as Eino Mukav Vil is only if the hole can be seen clearly in a visible eye, a regular eye looking at the hole. But not that you have to take special measures as looking against the sun. So now these pin and needle holes, if they're not visible to the eye clearly, so they did not really render this area unfit, because actually you can write over them. And any hole that is tiny, that you can write over it, doesn't make it Eino Mukav Vil. So you didn't gain anything. So therefore you have to be careful, if you even want to follow the Gan HaMelech, that the holes should be a bit big. Although I understand that it won't be nice, but if you want to follow this suggestion of the Gan HaMelech, then you have to make bigger holes. And the holes have to cover the area, so there won't be any area in the 9-letter area that can be written on. So the holes have to be big. Another advice that you can is to cut with a razor a slit. It won't be seen, but since the slit is long, either vertical or horizontal, doesn't matter. If it's horizontal, it has to be several of them, that it cover the area, that there won't be you won't be able to write 9 letters. A razor slit, although it's very sharp and not recognizable immediately, since it's long, has the law of a hole that is visible to the eye. Like the Mikdash Me'at says that if you would pull the cloth, then obviously the slit would open, it would be visible. This is considered a nekev she'eino ra'ui l'ktiva according to all opinions. So we have to be careful if we want to use the advice and the suggestion of the Gan HaMelech and Rabbi Akiva Eiger to be definitely that at least these pinholes are unfit to be written on according to all opinions. Because if they are fit to be written according to the Magen Avram, although you want to be machmir, that the letter is considered not mukav vil, but who gave you permission to be makel against the Magen Avram and the majority of poskim that considered it a fitting to be written over, and how can you call this area unfit to be written? So this is the conclusion of this shiur, and again, I want to thank all the participants, and maybe Be'ezat Hashem we will find a way of continuing this type of shiurim, and thank you to all, and sheyeh bracha v'atzlacha, and the continuation of Chodesh Adar Marbim B'Simcha, and Hashem should bring additional simcha and smachot to Am Yisrael in all areas, in Gashmiut and Ruchmiut, and again, refuah sheleimah to all those that need refuah sheleimah, and a Yeshua B'karov to all those that need Yeshua, and Shalom.